Okay, let's jump right into it. Have you ever been reading historical texts, especially those ancient biblical narratives, and just felt this profound sense of shock at the sheer brutality of it all? Honestly, it's a super common reaction. Welcome to This Explainer. Today, we're going to completely unpack Zachary David Enfield's fascinating work, The Personable Government of God. Enfield really challenges us to rethink our basic assumptions here. He argues that our modern moral judgments often lack a bit of historical honesty, mostly because we completely misunderstand the brutal, logistical realities of the ancient world. You hear this all the time, right? Well, if I were in charge back then, I would have just instantly ended slavery and declared universal emancipation. It sounds like such a morally decisive thing to say, but Enfield points out a major trap we fall into. This mindset quietly imports the completed machinery of modern society into a world that fundamentally completely lacked it. The ancient world wasn't just modern society wearing sandals. They didn't just lack basic tech like zippers, they were entirely devoid of the humanitarian machinery we just totally take for granted today. Think about it. No Paw Patrol, no ankle monitors, no modern welfare state, and definitely no refugee agencies. Imagine trying to integrate an entire defeated population without identification records, national police, industrial food production, or a foster system. You literally couldn't do it. A command that requires non-existent institutions cannot be obeyed just because it sounds righteous to people living 3,000 years later.
So, moving into Section 1, Judging the Ancient World. We really need some historical honesty here to look at the world that actually existed.
Demanding that ancient Israel instantly integrate every displaced population is completely anachronistic. Why? Because they simply didn't possess the administrative or economic structures to pull it off. You see, a moral truth, like the inherent value of every single human being, is not the exact same thing as a society's actual capacity to institutionally embody that truth. You need constitutional courts, massive food surpluses, and stable laws of citizenship to actually carry that morality out. Without those, attempting mass integration wouldn't create peace. It would foreseeably create famine, competing land claims, violent insurgency, and ultimately just another war. This brings us perfectly to Section 2, Social Carrying Capacity Explained, which is a foundational theory Enfield proposes. Basically, social carrying capacity is a society's limit for absorbing unresolved claims or hostile identities before its own internal order totally fractures. This brilliantly explains why an ancient ruler couldn't just arbitrarily spare every defeated enemy without risking the absolute collapse of their own civilization. A society can only sustain so much complexity before it breaks. An ancient ruler wasn't just responsible for the defeated people standing right in front of them. They were desperately responsible for ensuring their own community didn't starve or fall to a restored enemy power from within. Enfield challenges modern critics here with a barrage of rhetorical questions. First up, spared into starvation? It's so easy for us to sit back and say, just spare everybody. But the ancient ruler had to ask, spared into what exactly? If there's no industrial food production, who feeds thousands of captives when the harvest inevitably fails? Or consider this, spared into permanent displacement? Who settles their land claims and actually protects them without a centralized modern state? If you spare an entire rival political community, but lack the carrying capacity to give them land and protection, you are literally just leaving them entirely exposed. And finally, spared into slavery under another power? The author neutrally points out that keeping someone biologically alive while providing absolutely no sustainable social existence might just relocate or prolong their suffering. Preserving biological life isn't automatically a complete act of mercy if it just means they get pushed out to be enslaved by the next empire over. Okay, Section 3, the ancient corporate nation. We really have to move past our modern obsession with the individual to grasp this. Today, we totally view people as autonomous individuals. But in antiquity, identity was intensely corporate. It was tied entirely to your household, your clan, and your political loyalty. So a conquered population wasn't just a temporary humanitarian need. It presented a massive ongoing political problem. Defeating an ancient army did not mean the threat was gone. Political loyalty and potential rebellion survived corporately through families, elders, and kinship networks. Elders preserved the history and the grievance, and children matured into future soldiers determined to restore the former order. To explain this, the text impartially applies this body-politic cancer comparison. It argues that any institutional movement becomes cancerous, not by its identity or race, but purely through specific malignant operations. Things like uncontrolled growth, extracting resources, and destroying the host system. Enfield makes a really sharp diagnostic distinction here. Identifying a pathology purely by ancestry, that's exterminative logic. But looking strictly at malignant operations, that gives us true diagnostic precision to understand when a political order is actively attacking the system sustaining it. Moving right along to Section 4, regulating a hard reality. Let's look at how biblical laws actually interacted with the sheer violence of the Bronze and Iron Ages. This is absolutely crucial. Regulation is not origination, and permission is not perfection. Enfield argues that God did not invent the brutal systems of the ancient world. Instead, he entered a hardened, pre-existing reality and established government right in the middle of it. Practices like forced labor and conquest already existed globally. Governing a hardened social reality doesn't mean that reality is the ultimate moral ideal. God was regulating a system he didn't originate. Think of these biblical laws as developmental restraints. They placed careful, strict boundaries on existing war practices, rather than magically abolishing them overnight. The ancient world was unbelievably severe, but these texts placed limits inside that severity. Take the law requiring a period of mourning for a captive woman. Does it turn captivity into modern consent? No, but it absolutely imposes a boundary that completely did not exist in the wider ancient context. It stops the system from operating without limit. Enfield strictly maintains what he calls the narrow way. Yes, violent methods were among the very narrow options available due to a lack of capacity. But, and this is a big but, historical necessity must always be demonstrated, not merely assumed to justify brutality. We can't pretend unrestricted integration was an easy option back then. It wasn't. But we also can't just announce that wiping out every civilian was invariably the only way to survive. Ancient states also used tribute, intermarriage, and deportation. The necessity for violence has to be proven. Let's put this into perspective using American history. Expanding a nation's moral carrying capacity to recognize full reciprocal membership, it takes immense time, struggle, and literal institutional construction. It took a whole century of active resistance and constitutional transformation to move from the abolition of slavery to the Civil Rights Act. A society can have a beautiful abstract declaration like all men are created equal, long before it actually builds the legal and cultural infrastructure required to truly embody it. So what is the ultimate takeaway here? Simply put, greater capacity creates greater responsibility. Modern states, fully equipped with vast infrastructure and international law, absolutely cannot use ancient limitations as an excuse for modern cruelty. We have the professional administration and massive economic surplus that ancient rulers lacked. So while this developmental argument protects ancient societies from our dishonest modern projection, it completely removes ancient necessity as an excuse for anything we do today. Finally, Section 5, the law written within. Let's look at the inward transformation that is the theological conclusion of this whole framework. The text defines this as personable government. It argues that God meets people right in their societal infancy without confusing it with adulthood, but also without declaring that infancy is their final form. If God just dropped completed modern humanitarian machinery onto Bronze Age Canaan, it would be a totally alien machine to them. They wouldn't understand the assumptions about individuality at all. So God doesn't just manipulate humans for correct external outcomes, he governs personably, working within their actual limitations to form them internally. All of these steps form a developmental staircase: command, discipline, repentance, and ultimately inward inscription. Enfield points to Jeremiah 31 here. The goal isn't to destroy the historical people to install an unrelated moral machine from heaven. The goal is moving the law inward. A nation becomes capable of carrying the law themselves because they actually come to love and understand the good, rather than just being physically forced into behaviors they find totally alien. As we wrap up this explainer, I really want to leave you with a thought provoker. We now possess the completed capacities that those ancient rulers lacked. So, what kind of society are we actively choosing to build with them? We really can't judge the ancients for lacking the institutions we have today, but we absolutely must judge ourselves by what we do with the immense social carrying capacity we've inherited. Are we writing the law on our collective hearts to carry righteousness forward? Keep asking these hard questions, and thanks so much for exploring this with me today.